I'm working on a small wall cabinet here, and I have all the parts cut to size, so it's time for the joinery. I didn't want anything too complicated, so I'm going to assemble the pieces using rabbet joints, where I'm cutting a rabbet in the long side pieces to accept the top and bottom. In addition, I'm going to cut a rabbet along the back edges of the pieces to accept the case back. And I thought that this project was a perfect opportunity to talk about a quick and easy technique for cutting rabbets here at the table saw without using a dado blade. Instead, I'm just going to use an ordinary blade. Now you may be thinking to yourself, why not use a dado blade? Well, not all table saws are equipped to accept a dado blade, or you may not have one. Even if you do, I find that this technique is just as easy if you're only making a few cuts. And one more benefit is that if you need to cut a large rabbet like this one, it can be a little tricky to do with a regular dado blade. The key to making a rabbet with a single blade is to make it in two cuts. You're going to use one cut to define the shoulder of the rabbet and the second cut to define its bottom. So I'm going to clear away everything and get set up for the first cut, and you'll be able to see how this works. I have everything set up, and I'm going to get to those details in a minute, but what I want to talk about first is the type of blade that I have set up. Now, most of the cuts for these rabbet joints are going to be rip cuts, so I've installed a rip blade in the saw. However, for this first cut, where I'm defining the shoulder of the rabbet joint is a cross cut, but I find that a nice sharp rip blade will make a nice clean cross cut. Now, once the blade's installed, you can take care of some of those setup details. For this first cut, since I'm defining the shoulder, I'm going to raise the height of the saw blade to match the overall depth of the rabbet. Then I want to position the rip fence to cut the width of the rabbet. Now, rather than measure from the saw blade over to my rip fence, I'm going to use a different method. I'm going to use the actual piece for the top and the bottom as a setup gauge. And I'll set it up against the rip fence, slide it into position so that the tooth on the saw blade is flush with the outside surface on the workpiece. To back up the cut and control the workpiece during the cut, I've attached an auxiliary fence to my miter gauge. I mentioned earlier that the second cut is going to define the bottom of the rabbet. As you can see, I can't make the cut with the workpiece like this, so I'm going to change its orientation and hold the workpiece on end. Now, when I do that, there are a couple of things that you want to keep in mind. The first is the height of the blade. You can see here that I've raised the blade so that it just cuts into the kerf that I've created when I made the shoulder cut. The second thing to keep in mind is the orientation of the workpiece. Here what I want to do is cut it and hold the piece so that the waste piece that's created when I make this cut falls away safely to the outside of the blade where it isn't going to get trapped. Now, as I make this cut, I have a couple of things in mind. I want to hold it flat against the fence and square to the table so that it doesn't tip. To do that, I've attached a tall auxiliary fence to my rip fence, and I'm going to use an MDF push block to guide the piece from behind and keep my fingers safely out of the way. To prevent the workpiece from rising up during the cut, hold the workpiece firmly against the saw table. Sweet. One of the nice side benefits of using a rip blade to cut rabbet joints is that you end up with smooth, clean joint faces on both the bottom and the shoulder cut, as well as a nice, crisp corner. The result is a snug-fitting joint. Now, all I need to do is cut the long edge rabbets that hold the case back. For the shoulder cut on the back edge of the case pieces, hold the workpiece flat on the saw table and against the rip fence as you make the cut. After repositioning the blade and the rip fence, hold the workpiece on edge and cut the bottom of the rabbet, allowing the waste piece to fall to the outside of the blade. The rip blade does a great job of creating two flat, smooth faces for the rabbet joints on the long grain parts of the case pieces. And once I get everything put together, you can see that my back piece fits in there nicely. I have a little bit of work left to do to wrap up the work on this wall cabinet, but you can see how this 2-pass method for cutting rabbets can be applied to your next project.